All right, resuming here with Gravity's Rainbow. We are on part 3 in the zone, and so now we're following Slothrop into the American occupied zone in Central Europe, in Germany. And this part it has 32 episodes, which refers to a couple of things. Number one, it refers to the law of falling bodies, as Joyce used it in Ulysses, where bodies fall at a constant rate of acceleration, 32 feet per second is the rate of acceleration for the fall of a body. And then Joyce and Ulysses contrasted that. His version of the rainbow motif was the number 11. And I think it's in Romans 11:32, where Paul writes that, "For God has consigned man to disobedience, so that he may show his mercy to all," which is a little bit like the rainbow that he creates after the flood as a way of showing his mercy, that he promises never to do it again, to wipe humans out again. And here, it's the rainbow motif instead of the number 11. And 11 restarts a cycle after you get to 10. You start a cycle over again. So it symbolizes rebirth any way you look at it. But then there's also the idea of Kabbalah having the 10 Sephiroth. And the Sephiroth are these cosmic emanations that descend downward from Keter, which is the one. It's equivalent to Plotinus's one. And then it breaks into Chokhmah and Binah, reason and understanding, and then goes downward all the way down to Malkuth, which is the earth itself. So it's the descent and evolution of the power of God through these different spheres, which give to the human being his various faculties of understanding, reason, courage, compassion, and so forth. That's what the Sephiroth represent. 10 Sephiroth, and then 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which are essential for, that are linked to the Kabbalah. They all have different number values too, as well, those 22 letters. So the 10 and the 22 bring us to 32. So those are the reasons why there are 32 episodes precisely. The ruling astrological sign now shifts to Leo. We shift from Aries to Leo, which is still a fire sign, but whereas Aries is inceptual. There's a certain amount of nascence and rawness about the birth of the personality with Aries, whereas here with Leo, the personality is perfectly stable. It's crystallized. Leos love to be the center of attention, and the sign Leo is all about exerting your will. And here we'll find in part 3 that Slothrop will indeed be the section's center of attention. Everybody's out after him or wanting to form a counterforce in his memory. So it is very much, he's very much out there, let's say. But also notice too that there's an epigraph from Dorothy arriving in Oz, from The Wizard of Oz. "Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." So that's Slothrop now arriving in the zone. It's a very different world from anything he's seen on the French Riviera or in London. It's much more chaotic. And also note the reference to the lion in that film. There's the cowardly lion who is looking for courage, but also note the reference too to the Tin Man. The Tin Man is looking for a heart. The Scarecrow is looking for a brain. But now with the Tin Man, the Tin Man was chopped up, recall, and put back together again as a cyborg. So he's a biomechanical man, which is a motif that I wrote about way back. The biomechanical motif. And we saw it in V, with her gradual descent into the inanimate, her gradual becoming a cyborg, all these body parts being replaced. One of her eyes is replaced by a little clock face, and so on, all this biomechanical imagery. But so we have that with the Tin Man, and with this character that we're going to be introduced to here in this section, Chicherin, who is a Soviet spy, or works for Soviet intelligence. Many of his body parts have been replaced as well, which the ultimate origins of this motif of the half-human, half-machine cyborg goes back to Edgar Allan Poe's 1839 short story, The Man Who Was Used Up, where a guy goes to visit a general that people won't say anything about him. He's a war hero. I believe he was in the War of 1812, maybe the Mexican-American Wars. No, those are after. So it would be the War of 1812 that he was from, 1839. And he goes to visit him, and then when he goes into his room, there's this scrap heap on the floor that begins to sort of talk to him, and his servant comes in and puts them together, has to screw all the body parts on, and here we have the birth of the cyborg. As far as I can tell, Poe invented it. That goes all the way down here to Chicherin, and then of course later into 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s pop culture, the Terminator, all that kind of stuff. So there's those references. So Pynchon's references are sneaky and clever. You really got to sit and think about it for a second. It's not just a sarcastic remark, as with the King Kong reference at the beginning of part 2. And so too, as we move into part 3, just as part 2 began with an erotic relationship between Slothrop and Katja Borgesius, this also begins with an erotic relationship with a witch, a girl named Gelly Tripping. Gelly is short for Angelica. But first, he's riding on his way to Nordhausen. He's just going along, hitching rides, hopping trains, and he's reviewing the documents that he had received when he was at the grave of Laszlo Yanf. And Mario Schweitar had given him a dossier of documents where he learns, as he's reviewing them now, we find out what was in those documents is that he learns that he was sold by his uncle, Lyle Bland. Doesn't say much about his father. We only learned his father's name, Broderick Slothrop. But Lyle Bland was his uncle, and apparently he was sold as an infant to Laszlo Yanf, working for I.G. Farben. And Lyle Bland was on the board of something called the Slothrop Paper Company. And so as Slothrop's reviewing these documents, he realizes that he was in fact sold to this corporation, basically to I.G. Farben. And so that's him putting all this together. That's the main realization here in this section. And then he's moving along. He hitches a ride on a train. He's thinking about all this while he's inside the freight train. And then he climbs up to the top where we meet another character. So we're getting a whole cast of new characters here coming in now to displace the old cast, although they will recur. Major Dwayne Marvey, who's this big, fat major guy, old-fashioned. You can imagine him chomping a cigar. Pynchon doesn't have that cliche, but and here he's talking about the Schwarzkommando. He himself is on his way to Nordhausen, which is the place where the rockets were being manufactured. After Peenemünde was bombed by the British in 1943, they shifted it to this mountain, this town, Nordhausen, and a mountain there. And there's an important mountain near Nordhausen called the Brocken, which we'll get to in a second. And so he's talking about the Schwarzkommando and how they might be at Nordhausen, and he wants to get rid of them. He's a racist. And so appropriately, then right behind him, up comes Enzian, the commander of the Schwarzkommando, and he comes up and just shoves him off the train. So the guy just falls right off the roof. He doesn't die because he turns up again later, but he's kind of I forget what the comedic term is for it, like a punching bag here, and then later he's the poor guy who gets mistaken for Slothrop wearing a pig outfit, and Pointsman's men castrate him instead of Slothrop. This guy doesn't fare very well. It's pretty funny stuff. So Enzian comes up and introduces himself. I'm Oberst Enzian of the Schwarzkommando, but we're all DPs now, displaced persons. And he's apparently on his way to, the train's going to Nordhausen, so everyone that's in it is on their way to Nordhausen for various reasons. Slothrop mainly to find out about the Escarite and rocket quintuple 0. And of course, Enzian will be associated with rocket quadruple 01 at the end of the novel. And then recall too that Enzian was the lover of Weissmann. Lieutenant Weissmann, when he was in South Africa in 1922, I believe it was. In V, it's 1922. Enzian is an NV, but it must have happened after that scene with Kurt Mondaugen there ends. And recall so that Enzian is the half-brother of a man named Chicherine, who we also meet, or at least not physically, but he's introduced here. Chicherine, who works for Soviet intelligence, and he's his half-brother, and Chicherine wants to destroy the Schwarzkommando and kill his half-brother Enzian. So he's looking for him. And so now Slothrop meets both characters here. Not physically Chicherine. He never actually shows up in this chapter. And then so they arrive at Nordhausen, which is a town that's a lot of the houses are missing roofs. A lot of migratory people, nomads wandering around, displaced persons wandering around. And then he meets this girl who's singing a little song about Chicherine, about her lover, and how she is yearning for him. She's playing a balalaika, so he comes up and approaches her, and her name is Gelly Tripping. Turns out that she's a witch, and Citrine is a womanizer, and she realizes this, and apparently it doesn't bother her. Oh, he's just out fucking some woman somewhere, don't worry. She's pretty loose too, because she has sex with Slothrop almost right after they meet. So they're in this house, and then she has an owl. So this owl shows up, and she asks Slothrop to go to the dressing table or whatever and fetch a Baby Ruth candy bar to feed to the owl. She's got, for some reason, she's trained it to eat these Baby Ruth candy bars. And Slothrop's like, shouldn't it be out hunting mice and stuff? I mean, you're really spoiling this owl. You're making him a house owl. And she goes, you're kind of lazy too, as his name indicates, of course. But the owl, of course, is, now we're near the Brocken, so it's appropriate that he meets a girl who's a witch, because the Brocken, recall, first the owl, before we get to the Brocken, the owl is sacred, has a long history. It's sacred to Athena on the one hand, but Athena is a much later, more complex semiotic character with a lot of differing heterogeneous characteristics. She's the patron of Athens and reason and rationality, and also of soldiers. So you wouldn't expect her, a death animal like the owl, to be associated with her, but she's patron of soldiers. She's the patron of Odysseus in the Odyssey. And so the owl feeds her wisdom, because the owl has wide eyes and it can see in the dark very clearly. And so it goes all the way back into the Neolithic. Maria Gimbutas traces the archaeology of the owl goddess as a death goddess. In the Neolithic, you find a lot of these burial urns that are in the shape of owls with human ashes inside of them. And you find the owl in association with burial all over the place. And indeed, the owl, generally through mythology, is associated with the underworld. The same thing in the Popol Vuh, when the two characters there are down in the underworld, they are fed wisdom from these owls that are down there. So it's universally an underworld characteristic. And Pynchon is tipping the hat here toward this middle section as being a kind of night sea journey for Slothrop, a Nicaea, even though the astrological sign is Leo, and Leo is always associated with the sun. Nonetheless, later on he'll be on a ship called the Anubis, and the Anubis is one of the Egyptian gods of the dead, and the priests wear the mask of Anubis when they are mummifying dead bodies. So there's a lot of underworld references as we go through here. And so the Brocken is the place in Faust where the Walpurgisnacht takes place, which is held on May Day. And Gelly says here that she goes, ever since she's had her first period, she's been going every May Day to the Brocken to participate there. And Goethe in that scene has a bunch of witches running around. Mephistopheles leads Faust there. The mountain has a kind of flat top, so that you can go up there and they can hold orgies or whatever it is these witches would have done. And the phrase for the Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, refers to the Brocken. It's in that passage in Faust where they say, the mountain is mad with magic tonight. And so Thomas Mann calls his book Der Zauberberg, the Magic Mountain, in reference to the Brocken. And so naturally he would meet a witch near the Brocken, and she asks him, have you been up to the Brocken? He's like, no. And then she tells him about Citrine, how Citrine should have showed up today. He's like, what? And he gets up out of bed, he starts putting his socks on, he starts having visions in his head of this angry soldier with a gun coming after him. But she's very casual about it, and she's like, he's out with some woman, he's not going to show up tonight, don't worry about it. And she doesn't believe that he's a war correspondent named Ian Scuffling. In fact, nobody does. Dwayne Marvey didn't believe it. Nobody buys his persona as a war correspondent, even though he points out, I've got a mustache just like Hemingway does. And she says, oh, well, then I suppose you're not interested in rocket number quintuple 0. And he pauses for a second. It's like, how the fuck could she know about this? And furthermore, she says, oh, and what about that Escarate? I suppose you're not interested in that either. And now he stops and he realizes, okay, how does she know all this information about stuff I've been looking for? And it's because of Citrine, of course, being an intelligence, Russian intelligence. He's been telling her all his stuff, all his secrets, and she offers to tell them to him. So this calms him down. And he says, all right, tell me all about this Schwarzgerät. And then she says, in a town called Svinemunde, you can get the Escarate. So you have to go to Swinemunda, which I think is in the Russian-occupied sector at this point. And there's a guy there who waits on the Strand Promenade, and he'll be wearing a white suit. So you can talk to him about the escarate. And he immediately thinks of Blodgett Waxwing and his white zoot suit, but it'll turn out actually to be a character known as Der Springer, or the director that we've already met briefly, Gerhard von Gohl, the movie director. So that will be the man in the white suit that he will meet. And then they calm down, they have sex again, and while they're having sex, the owl comes in and jumps on his back and scrapes his back, as she does also with her nails, and it really pisses him off. But then that's it. So he realizes, oh, you are a witch. He's like, did you teach that? Chicherin trained him to do that, right? He says, and she says, no, I trained him to do that. So Slothrop realizes that she is a witch. And indeed, near the end of the novel, she will cast a spell that will prevent Chicherin and Enzian from recognizing each other. Even though they meet, they don't recognize each other because she casts a spell to prevent that from happening. So she does have those powers. So those are some of the new characters that were introduced here. We'll stop there. There'll be a lot more new characters as we follow Slothrop's progress through the ruins of war-torn Europe.